The barn door exploded inward with the wind. Wyatt Cole turned from the harness he was mending, his children beside him, and froze. A woman in a wedding dress stood in the doorway, veil torn, lips blue, eyes wild with desperation. She took one step forward and collapsed into the hay. December snow fell heavy on Montana territory that night. The temperature had dropped below freezing an hour past, and the wolves were already singing in the distant timber. Wyatt's hands shook as he stared at the woman crumpled against the hay bales, her white dress stark against the golden straw. The last time a woman had stood in his barn was 3 years ago. His wife, Mary, days before fever took her. "Papa!" 8-year-old Hope rushed forward with a horse blanket, wrapping it around the stranger's shoulders. 6-year-old Tommy stood frozen, eyes wide as silver dollars. Wyatt forced himself to move. His boots felt like lead as he crossed the barn floor. The woman's breathing came shallow and quick, her skin pale as moonlight. When he lifted her, she weighed almost nothing. "They left me," she whispered through chattering teeth. At the church, no one came. The weight of her in his arms triggered something visceral, a memory of carrying Mary's fevered body, of helplessness and grief. His chest tightened. He hadn't allowed himself to feel anything in 3 years. He'd built careful walls around his heart, brick by brick, silence by silence. "Inside," he managed, voice hoarse. "Quick now." Hope grabbed the lantern. Tommy held the door against the wind. Together they crossed the yard to the modest ranch house, snow swirling around them like ghosts. Inside, Wyatt laid the woman by the stone fireplace. Her wedding dress was torn at the hem, mud-stained and soaked through. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling across her face in wet tangles. She couldn't have been more than 25. Hope rushed to stoke the fire while Tommy fetched blankets. The children moved with practiced efficiency. They'd learned early how to survive without a mother. The woman's eyes opened slowly. They were brown, deep as creek water, and filled with a shame that Wyatt recognized. She was looking at him not with need, but with the raw vulnerability of someone who'd been discarded. "Thank you," she whispered. Wyatt's throat went dry. He nodded once and stepped back, putting distance between them. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, something he'd kept frozen for 3 long years began to crack. Ruth Winslow's hands thawed slowly in the heat of the fire. She couldn't stop shaking, not from the cold anymore, but from the humiliation of telling these strangers how she'd been left at the altar like livestock deemed unfit. The man Wyatt. His daughter had called him, stood across the room with his arms crossed. His face was weathered from sun and wind, his eyes a pale gray that revealed nothing. But his jaw was tight, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I came from Illinois," Ruth said quietly. "Mail-order bride. The arrangement was made through letters. I was to marry a rancher's son." Hope handed her a tin cup of coffee. The little girl's kindness made Ruth's eyes burn with tears. "What happened?" Hope asked gently. "I arrived yesterday morning. They picked me up at the station, drove me to the church." Ruth's voice cracked. "When we got there, the groom took one look at me and walked away. His father said I wasn't what they expected. They left me on the church steps with my bag." Wyatt's jaw clenched tighter. Tommy moved closer to Ruth, his small hand resting on her arm. "You got nowhere to go?" Wyatt asked. His voice was rough, carefully neutral. "No money, no family. I used everything I had to come here." Ruth looked down at her hands. "I walked for hours trying to find help. Your barn was the first light I saw." Silence settled over the room. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm intensified, wind screaming through the eaves. "You can stay tonight," Wyatt said finally. "Storm should break by morning. Town's 8 miles south. Someone there can help you figure what comes next." Ruth nodded, grateful even for one night's shelter. But Hope looked up at her father with those wide, knowing eyes. "Papa, where will she go tomorrow?" The question hung in the air. Wyatt's face went carefully blank. the expression of a man who'd taught himself not to feel. He turned toward his bedroom without answering. "Get some sleep," he said over his shoulder. "Morning comes early." Through the thin walls that night, Wyatt heard Ruth crying softly. The sound traveled through the wood and settled in his chest like a stone. He pressed his forehead against the cold window glass and watched snow fall in the darkness. Just one night, he told himself, one night, and she'd be gone. But even as he thought it, he knew it was a lie. Dawn broke cold and clear over Montana territory. Wyatt stood at his wife's grave on the hillside overlooking the ranch, frost biting through his knees. "I can't do this again, Mary," he said to the wooden cross. "I can't let someone in just to lose them." The words came easier here, where no one could hear his weakness. 3 years ago, Mary had died in the barn during a difficult childbirth. He'd ridden through a blizzard trying to reach the doctor, but came back too late. She'd bled out in the hay while Hope and Tommy slept in the house. Unaware their mother was slipping away, her last words echoed in his memory, "Don't let fear make you small." Wyatt. He'd made a vow that night never again. Never let another woman into their lives, into their hearts. The risk of loss was too great. Better to live frozen than to break again. A shout from the house shattered his thoughts. Wyatt ran down the hillside, boots slipping on snow-packed ground. He found Hope and Tommy at the property's edge, clinging to Ruth Winslow. She'd packed her few belongings and tried to leave on foot through the snow. "You can't go," Tommy cried, gripping her hand. "The wolves will get you." Ruth knelt in the snow, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I won't be a burden to your father. I have to find my own way." "There ain't no way," Hope said fiercely. "Not in winter. Not alone." Wyatt approached slowly. Ruth looked up at him, and he saw the same desperate pride he felt every time someone in town offered charity after Mary died. The refusal to be pitied. The need to survive on your own terms. His children's faces were raw with fear and something else, hope. Real hope. The kind he hadn't seen since before their mother died. The decision rose in his throat like something inevitable. "You'll stay," he said. "Until spring. You'll work for your keep, same as anyone else. No charity, a fair trade." Ruth stood slowly, searching his face. "Spring thaw, that's the deal. That's the deal." "I'll earn my place," she said. "I promise." Tommy grabbed Wyatt's hand, then Ruth's, connecting them. "Spring's when things come back to life, Papa." Wyatt looked at his son, then at Ruth, then back toward the hillside where Mary's grave stood against the morning sky. A crow took flight from the wooden cross, disappearing into the pale blue. "Come on," he said quietly. "Work doesn't wait." As they walked back to the ranch, Wyatt felt the weight of his broken vow settling into his bones. He was letting her in, not all the way, just enough to survive the winter, but some part of him, the part that still remembered how to hope, whispered that spring was a long way off, and a lot could change before the snow melted. Ruth proved herself in silence. No complaints, no requests for easier tasks. By the second week of January, Wyatt caught himself waiting for the sound of her footsteps in the barn each morning. She learned fast. How to feed the horses without spooking them. How to mend harnesses with tight, even stitches. How to stretch a pot of stew to feed 4 people for 3 days. She moved through the ranch like someone grateful for every hour she wasn't cast out into the cold. Hope taught her to braid hair in the evenings. Tommy showed her how to whistle for the horses 2 short bursts. One long, slowly, carefully. The rhythm of the household shifted. One morning, a chicken escaped the coop and Ruth chased it through the snow, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. Wyatt watched from the barn door, and something loosened in his chest, something he'd kept locked tight for 3 years. Another day, she slipped on ice while carrying water. Wyatt caught her before she fell, his hand steadying her waist. For 3 heartbeats they stood that way, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her brown eyes. Then they both pulled away. Too quickly, too carefully. "Thank you," she said. "Watch your step," he replied, and turned back to his work. But that night, stacking firewood side by side, their hands brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. The touch lasted only a moment, but it said everything their words couldn't. In late January, Wyatt rode to town for supplies. At the general store, the shopkeeper, a thin man named Hutchins, leaned across the counter with a meaningful look. "Folks are talking. Cole, that woman you took in, the one who got herself abandoned at the church." Wyatt's hand stilled on the bag of flour. "They're saying it ain't proper," Hutchins continued. "A man alone with a woman like that under his roof. Think of your children." Wyatt's jaw went tight. He counted out coins slowly, deliberately. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold as January wind. "My children are fed, warm, and happy. That's what I think about." He gathered his supplies and walked out without another word. But on the ride home, his hands gripped the reins too hard, and his mind churned with questions he didn't want to answer. That night, Ruth served dinner venison stew and cornbread. When she passed him a plate, their fingers touched. This time, neither of them let go immediately. Hope noticed. She smiled into her stew, saying nothing. The household was shifting from transaction to something unnamed, something dangerous, something that felt like hope. The blizzard hit on a Tuesday night and pinned them inside for 3 days. By the second evening, with the children asleep in the loft, Ruth and Wyatt sat by the fire, and the walls they'd built began to crumble. "Can I ask you something?" Ruth said quietly. Wyatt nodded, whittling a piece of wood into a toy horse for Tommy. "Why did you let me stay, really?" His hands stilled. He stared at the half-formed horse, gathering words. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said finally. "I made myself a promise after that. No more risks. No more letting people in. Safer that way. But you broke your promise. My children broke it for me." He looked up at her. "They saw something I didn't want to see." "What's that?" "That living frozen ain't really living at all." The fire crackled between them. Outside, wind screamed through the eaves. "The groom who left me," Ruth said, voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't reject me just for my face. He rejected me because I can't have children." Wyatt's knife stopped moving. "I had a miscarriage 2 years ago. The doctor said there was damage. Said I'm..." Her voice broke. "Barren." That's the word he used. "When the family found out, they called the whole thing off. That why you're carrying all this shame. I'm incomplete. What man wants a wife who can't give him children?" She looked at him with raw vulnerability. "I thought if I could just be useful, maybe someone would let me stay. Somewhere. Anywhere." Wyatt set down the knife. He'd never been good with words, but some truths were too important to leave unspoken. "I failed my wife," he said. "She died in childbirth because I couldn't get the doctor here in time. I blame myself every day since. Figured I was incomplete too. Figured I'd failed the one job a husband has to protect." Their eyes met across the firelight. Two broken people, carrying shame that wasn't theirs to carry. "You're not incomplete," Wyatt said quietly. "You're the bravest person I've met." Before Ruth could respond, a cry came from the loft. Tommy's voice, frightened and small. Ruth moved without thinking, climbing the ladder to where the boy thrashed in nightmare. She gathered him in her arms, rocking gently, singing a lullaby in a language Wyatt didn't recognize. He watched from below as his son's breathing steadied, as the fear left Tommy's face. When Ruth finally laid him back down, she turned and found Wyatt at the top of the ladder. "You're good with them," he said. "They make it easy." "No, you make it look easy. There's a difference." The next day, the blizzard still raging, They worked side by side, mending harnesses. The space was small, the proximity unavoidable. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. "You're not what people say about you," Wyatt murmured. "Neither are you," Ruth replied. From the loft, Hope's voice drifted down, sleepy and certain. "She's family, Papa." Wyatt looked at Ruth. She looked back. Something shifted between them, something that couldn't be undone. The storm broke on the third day. They stepped outside into a world transformed. Snow glittering under hard blue sky. Ruth stumbled on the uneven drifts. Wyatt's arm came around her waist, steadying her. They stood that way longer than necessary. When he finally released her, they both felt the loss. Ruth had hoped the town might accept her if she stayed quiet and invisible. She was wrong. The Sunday meeting came in early February. The weather had warmed just enough to turn snow to slush, creating the illusion of spring. But nothing about that morning felt hopeful. Warren Kent stood in the church after services, his voice carrying to every corner. He was a large man, wealthy, used to being heard. His son was the one who'd left Ruth at the altar. "We need to address an indecency in our community," Kent announced. "Wyatt Cole has taken in a woman of questionable character. A woman my son wisely refused to marry after discovering her lies." Ruth stood in the back of the church, her face draining of color. Wyatt sat 3 pews ahead with Hope and Tommy. "This woman," Kent continued, "is living under Cole's roof, corrupting his children with her presence. It ain't proper, it ain't Christian, and it needs to stop." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. Ruth felt every eye turn toward her. The shame was suffocating. "Cole," Kent said directly, "send her away. For your children's sake, if nothing else." Wyatt stood slowly. Ruth's heart leaped. He was going to defend her, going to tell these people the truth. But when Wyatt opened his mouth, nothing came out. He looked at Ruth, at the crowd, at Kent's satisfied smirk. His jaw worked, his hands clenched, and he stayed silent. The silence stretched for 5 heartbeats, 10, 20. Ruth understood. She saw the fear in his eyes, the calculation. He was weighing her against his children's futures, against the town's acceptance, against everything he'd worked to build. "Say something," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her from across the church. "Please." But Wyatt just stood there, frozen like he'd been that first night in the barn. Frozen by fear and doubt and the terrible weight of choosing, Ruth turned and walked out. The cold air hit her face like a slap. She ran through the muddy streets, past the general store, out toward the edge of town where the abandoned chapel still stood, the building where she'd been left, full circle. She collapsed on the steps, sobbing into her hands. "I'm cursed," she said to no one. "I ruin everything I touch." Footsteps approached, small footsteps. Hope and Tommy appeared, breathless from running. "We're not leaving you," Hope said fiercely. "Your father. Papa's scared," Tommy said with the blunt honesty of a child. "But he loves you. We all do." More footsteps, heavier. Wyatt appeared, his face stricken. "Ruth, don't." She stood, wiping her eyes. "I won't ruin you. I'll go at dawn." Before he could respond, 3 horses rode up. Warren Kent and 2 of his ranch hands. Kent's face was triumphant. "Good to see you're being reasonable. Cole, she'll leave by sunrise, or we'll make sure she does." Wyatt's hands curled into fists, but still, he said nothing. Ruth looked at him one last time. "Your silence said everything." She walked past him into the gathering dusk, Hope and Tommy running after her. Wyatt stood paralyzed as Kent and his men rode away, satisfied. The townspeople dispersed, some nodding approval, others looking uncomfortable, but none spoke up. None stood with him. Wyatt had failed the test, and he knew it. Wyatt returned to Mary's grave that night. broken. I'm a coward, he told the wooden cross. Stars emerged overhead, cold and distant. I froze when she needed me, just like I froze when you needed me. He knelt in the mud and melting snow, his chest so tight he could barely breathe. All those years of building walls, of protecting himself from pain, and for what he'd become exactly what he feared a man too afraid to live. I love her, Mary, he whispered. I didn't mean to, but I do. And I just stood there and let them destroy her. Footsteps approached. Small, determined footsteps. Hope appeared, her face fierce with tears and anger. Mama would be ashamed of you. Papa. The words hit like a physical blow. Hope. Miss Ruth loves us. She sings to Tommy when he has nightmares. She teaches me to be strong. She makes our house feel like home again. Hope's voice cracked. And you let them hurt her because you're scared. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From being happy? Hope wiped her eyes. If you let her go, I'll never forgive you. And Mama won't either. She ran back toward the house, leaving Wyatt alone with his dead wife and his living shame. He stayed there until dawn began to gray the eastern sky. Then he stood, his knees aching, and walked to the barn, the same barn where this all began. He could almost see her there, collapsing in her torn wedding dress. Could almost see Mary standing beside her. Both women made of memory and might have been. What do I do? He asked the empty air. And then, clear as if she'd spoken aloud, he heard Mary's voice. Don't let fear make you small. Wyatt. The memory of her last words. The permission he'd been waiting for. He understood suddenly honoring Mary didn't mean staying frozen in grief. It meant choosing life. Choosing courage. Choosing love when love scared him most. He strode to the house. Ruth sat at the table, her small bag packed beside her. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Wyatt took the bag and set it on the floor. You're staying, he said. Ruth looked up, desperate to believe but afraid to hope. They'll destroy you. Let them try. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands. I was silent yesterday. I won't be silent again. I'm going to town, and I'm going to make damn sure everyone knows you're staying. As my wife, if you'll have me. Wyatt. I love you. Ruth. I didn't plan it. Didn't want it. But I do. And I'm done being afraid. Hope and Tommy burst from the loft, wrapping their arms around both adults. Ruth sobbed, nodding against Wyatt's shoulder. They'll fight you, she whispered. Then we'll fight back. Together. Outside. The sun rose over Montana Territory. Inside. A family was reborn. Wyatt Cole walked into Sunday service with Ruth Winslow on his arm. Hope and Tommy flanked them like soldiers. The congregation's collective gasp was audible shock, outrage, and something that might have been fascination. Warren Kent rose from his pew, his face purple with rage. But Wyatt spoke first, his voice steady and loud enough to carry to every corner of the church. I know what you're all thinking, but before you judge, you're going to listen. He'd never been a man of speeches, never been comfortable with attention. But some things were too important to leave unsaid. You call this woman shameful, I call her the bravest soul I've met. She came here with nothing, was promised a home and a husband, and got abandoned like livestock. She could have turned bitter, could have given up. Instead, she showed nothing but kindness to my children when she had nothing herself. Ruth trembled beside him. Wyatt squeezed her hand. She mends our clothes, cooks our meals, sits with my son when nightmares wake him, teaches my daughter to be strong. She's made our house a home again. Something I didn't think was possible after my wife died. Kent started to interrupt, but Wyatt's look stopped him cold. I'm asking her to stay, as my wife. And if you have a problem with that, your problem's with me. The silence was absolute. Then Ruth stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "You should know something. I can't have children. The doctor said there was damage after a miscarriage. That's why his family rejected me." She looked at Kent. "That's the real reason your son walked away. Not because I lied, because I was honest." Gasps rippled through the church. This changed everything. She wasn't a temptress, but a wounded woman telling the truth. "I'm damaged goods." Ruth continued. "I know that, but Wyatt knows it too, and he's asking me anyway." Wyatt pulled her closer. "She's already given me a family again. That's everything." "That's more than enough." Warren Kent's face twisted. "You're a fool. Cole, throwing away your reputation for a woman who can't even speak of her that way again," Wyatt said quietly. "And we'll settle this outside." The church went dead silent. Kent looked around for support and found none. Even his allies were uncomfortable now, seeing Ruth's vulnerability, seeing Wyatt's devotion. Then Elder Moses stood. He was 80 if he was a day, bent with age but sharp-eyed. The man spoke in his heart. Moses said, "Any Christian here object to mercy, one by one, reluctantly." People sat back down. Some looked ashamed. Others looked away. But the resistance broke like ice in spring. Kent stormed out, his footsteps echoing on wood floors. The door slammed behind him. Wyatt and Ruth walked out together, children between them. The townspeople parted. Some nodded respect. Others avoided their eyes, but no one stopped them. Outside, in the cold February air, Ruth stopped and turned to Wyatt. "You really want this, me?" He kissed her forehead, gentle and certain. "I really want this." "I really want you?" Hope and Tommy cheered, and for the first time in 3 years. Wyatt Cole felt the ice around his heart completely melt. Spring came to Montana territory the way it always did, sudden and fierce, transforming the frozen land overnight. It came to Wyatt Cole's ranch the same way, bringing wildflowers, green grass, and a wedding at the abandoned chapel. The same chapel where Ruth had been jilted 2 months before. But this time, the church was full. Elder Moses officiated. Hope carried wildflowers in a basket. Tommy held the rings with solemn pride. Even some of the townspeople who judged Ruth harshest came. Shame and curiosity in equal measure. Ruth wore a simple dress, no white, no veil, just calico and honesty. When Wyatt took her hand, his voice was steady. "I vow to stand with you, in storms and in spring, in judgment and in joy, until my last breath." Ruth's voice shook but held, "I vow to love your children as my own, to make your house a home, to never let fear make us small." When he kissed her, Hope and Tommy cheered loud enough to echo off the rafters. The weeks that followed brought new rhythms. Ruth planted a garden: tomatoes, beans, squash. Wyatt built an addition to the house, expanding it room by room. The children played without the haunted quality they'd carried since their mother's death. One evening in April, they walked together to Mary's grave. Ruth carried wildflowers, the same ones that now bloomed across the hillside. She knelt and placed them at the wooden cross. "Thank you," Ruth whispered. "Thank you for him. Thank you for teaching him to love." Wyatt knelt beside her. For 3 years, this place had been a shrine to guilt and grief. Now it was just a resting place, honored, but no longer haunted. "She knows," Wyatt said quietly. "She sent you to us." "You think so?" "I know so." They walked back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky gold and red. The barn door stood open, warm light spilling out. Inside, Hope and Tommy were playing with a new litter of barn kittens, their laughter echoing. Wyatt stopped in the doorway, Ruth beside him. He looked at the exact spot where she'd collapsed that frozen December night, a stranger in a torn wedding dress, desperate and alone. "I thought you were a ghost come to punish me," he said. Ruth laughed. "I thought I was dying." We both were, just in different ways. She leaned against his chest. His arms came around her, solid and certain, above them. Stars emerged in the deepening blue. In the distance, wolves sang not threat, but reminder. They'd survived the winter. They'd chosen each other. They'd built something that would last. "Are we a real family now?" Tommy called from inside the barn. Wyatt and Ruth looked at each other and smiled. "We always were," they said together. The camera pulls wide. The homestead stands strong against the vast Montana landscape. Smoke rising from the chimney. Spring green spreading across the land. A home rebuilt. Hearts healed. The barn door, once a portal of fear and loss, now stands open in golden light. Children's laughter echoing from within. They survived the storm. They chose courage over fear. They built something the winter couldn't break. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for: someone to stand with when the wolves howl. Someone to build with when spring comes. Someone to love when loving seems impossible. Home ain't a place. It's the people who wait for you at the end of a long day, the end